Well, the World Trade Organization Director General Pascal Lamy says the East African trading bloc is ahead of the curve of other sub-Saharan African economies. That's with regards to infrastructure development. He pointed out the significance of intra-Africa trade against the backdrop of festering Eurozone crisis. Now, CNBC Africa's Beatrice Gachenge caught up with Lamy in Nairobi, the first of his stop of a 3-day regional tour. Let's take a look at that.
If you look at Africa as a whole, this continent has a problem with low infrastructures as compared to other continents, hence a handicap to trade. And first and foremost, a handicap to Africa trading with Africa. Now, Eastern African region is in many ways ahead of the curve in trade and economic integration in this continent. But when you look at how much better could be done, and I'm convinced a lot more could be done, the big bottleneck is in infrastructure development, port size, port operations, port handling, road links, rail links, energy grids. That's the most visible part. But there's also a part which needs to be addressed, which is on, customs procedures, standards harmonization. So in many ways, and that's what I've seen during this sort of trade facilitation visit in this country and in the region, and I'll be moving to Rwanda this afternoon, is how ahead of the curve Kenya and its EAC partners are on the one side, but also how much potential remains to be exploited.
The financial meltdown in Europe has emerged as one of the festering problems that is affecting trade, and Africa is one of the continents that is actually affected by this contagion. Is this a cue that Africa needs to take to actually increase intra-Africa trade within the African nations?
I would agree with that. In order for African growth to become more sustainable, more resilient, Africa has to grow its own domestic market. And by the way, if you look at African growth, today more than half of African growth is generated domestically by African consumers. So more of that in the future, which will make Africa, in a way, less dependent on the volatility of a number of raw material. But this diversification is on the move. And more of that will mean more sustainability and more resilience for African growth in the future.
In light of what you've just mentioned, what are the trends that we're seeing in Africa, especially in light of the widening current account deficits that we're seeing in various African nations, whereby we're net importers as opposed to exporting? What needs to be done with that regard?
Trade deficits are not a problem in themselves. As long as they are properly financed, there may be good reasons why a country like Kenya needs, for instance, to import industrial equipment, machines, which are not produced in the region. My own sense on this is trade-wise, this region is on the right track. More to come, again, a huge potential to be exploited that will go in the pocket of the consumers if you reduce the cost of trade. But I mean, what characterizes the Eastern African community, I think, as compared to other regional integration processes on this continent, is a sort of strong, permanent political engagement by domestic political leaders. This is, I think, what makes the difference between those who are on the fast lane of regional integration and those on the continent who are on the slower lane.
And finally, Africa produced two candidates who were aspiring to succeed you as the top boss for the World Trade Organization, but failed to clinch the position. What are some of the things that Africa needs to do in order to, to poise their leaders to take up such positions going forward?
Well, there were 9 candidates to succeed me in September. 2 of them were Africans. They didn't make it to the final round. other Africans have occupied important international organization leadership positions. Kande Yunkela was a very successful UNIDO DG, Jacques Diouf from Western Africa, head of the Food and Agricultural Organization, and as far as I understand, a Kenyan citizen who's a friend of mine, Dr. Kituyi, will be heading the UNCTAD, which is also an important position. So, overall, I think Africa is on the rise, and the number of Africans heading international organizations is also on the rise, while remembering that once you're elected in this position, the first thing you have to do
Pascal
on the
Lamy.
first morning of your job is forget about